Welcome to the Prado Museum. We're here continuing our Wednesday series of English conversations brought to you with the help of the American Friends of the Prado Museum. And today we'll be talking about 19th century art. And before we begin, we have to remember that 19th century art really is just a term. It's just something, it's a word that historians use to talk about the art that's produced in the 19th century, but it might lead us to the misconception that there's something that unites all of this art, that there's some aesthetic quality, that there's some defining characteristic, but of course the reality is much more complex than this. There's not a clear beginning and an end to styles in art history. They overlap, and they certainly don't fit into these neat start and end dates. What is true is about all of this art, though, is that the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution really sent shockwaves into society that would push Europe from the old regime to the new regime, which would be a modern society with new sensibilities and a diversity of artistic production that really was without precedent. And if there's one defining characteristic of 19th century art, it might actually be that loss of unity of style, the loosening of the tight grip of art academies and salons would be one of these outcomes in the changes in society. So to get a sense of this variety, today we'll be looking at two different sculptures, one being neoclassical and the other being romantic. So here, let's look at our neoclassical sculpture today. This Mercury, done in marble by Ramón Barba in 1804. Here we have the label. And we can see that the model for Mercury here is young, it's an idealized beauty, and Bernardo's showing some of his attributes here. We can see the wings on his heels, and then also on his helmet at the top, letting us know that this is Mercury, and he's carrying his staff, or the caduceus. So Mercury is young and an ideal beauty, and this interpretation really is based on the Dorophoros by Polykleitos. Barba trained in Rome alongside some of the most important Spanish sculptors of the time, and this sculpture was completed during his time in Rome. So what is neoclassical art? Well, this is a style of art, and we can see actually neoclassical art all in this room, not just in this sculpture here. But neoclassical art is art that really is produced more or less from the time of the French Revolution in 1789 to the fall of Napoleon in 1815. And it's a style that looked to antiquity for classical models in ancient Greek sculpture to find a true style of art, to find the most authentic representation of beauty that could regenerate the arts and also regenerate society. We have a little bit of noise, a few people coming through the museum, but that's all right. They'll be gone in just a minute. The things that happen when you film in a museum right before they open. So this interest in the past was also accompanied by an interest in archaeology, and archaeologists and sculptors would often work together to identify and classify and restore sculptures that were found in excavations. And this obsession with the past, with classical and ideal beauty, was really promoted by the academies and the salons, which were like the official art promoters and also like the official quality control of artistic production. These institutions, they promoted the study and the replication of classical models because they would reproduce values of temperance, of civic virtue, and also, it happened that at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, there's a real interest in the educational function of art and the capability of educating, of cultivating culturally sensitive, responsible, well-to-do citizens. And even today, this is a style that's associated with power, reason, balance, sobriety, civic morality, like all of the works that we have here in this room. And this sculpture specifically was made for the Casa del Labrador, which was like a country house near the royal palace in Aranjuez that the great Venetian and neoclassical sculptor Antonio Canova was in charge of decorating. And it would be completed with other sculptures by other Spanish artists that were working in Rome as well. So when we think of neoclassical art, we think of power, official art, official institutions, politics, propaganda, all of these things. But like I said at the beginning, with the transition from the old to the new regime, we have really shaken society to its core with economic changes, political changes, social changes, and artists started to question the authority of artistic styles that were imposed by the academies, and there was an eruption of new creative responses. And so new forms of expression coexisted with neoclassicism, and one of them is Romanticism. And so here we're going to see this romantic sculpture by José Piquer, Penitent Saint Jerome. This was completed in 1846 at the request of Queen Isabel II, who had seen the original plaster cast 2 years earlier, and she liked it so much that she ordered that the bronze be cast. So, what is Romanticism? What is a romantic sculpture? What's romantic art like? It's really almost more of an attitude than a style, and it's one of questioning really the dictatorship of reason and classical models. And many artists, they still look to antiquity for inspiration, but this coexisted with a newfound interest in emotion, feeling, passion, instead of reason and moderation. Romantic artists looked for individual roots, identities, local heroes, subjective experiences, rather than the universal heroes and classical values. And in this room we can see also that we're in front of this romantic sculpture, but also romantic paintings here that are associated with the reign of Isabel II. And when we look at this sculpture, we have to think of the difference of what we've just seen with Mercury. Starting off with the subject matter, and think of the severity of this image as compared to the perfect equilibrium of Mercury. Saint Jerome was an old man with an aged body, exhausted from a life of asceticism. And we can see him looking up in the moment that he is called to his last judgment, and the contrast of this scene, the tension of his body just about to fail, about to meet his end, all of this built up energy is enhanced when we compare it to what he's sitting on here. If you can notice, we have a tail and a foot. This is a lion. If we go to the other side, we'll see the lion's face, and the tranquility of this lion really contrasts with all of the emotional tension of Saint Jerome. Legend says that Jerome tended to a lion's hurt paw and that he tamed it, so we can see it tamed and domesticated. So really we have this climax of a moment of intense emotional experience, spiritual experience, subjective, interior. And the study of the model is done from life, and we're not looking at an idealized classical beauty here. And also notice how romantic sculpture is really, it really finds pleasure in the physicality of the surface. The surface of the classical sculpture really it reaches levels of perfection, and it seems like it doesn't even exist. You forget that you're looking at marble sometimes and just think of the skin that it reproduces. But here, the artist reproduces the surface that is expressive and sensual and physical, and it plays with light and shadows, really just like a painting would. And we could even say that this sculpture kind of echoes some painterly techniques in the free and uninhibited expressive handling of the material. Every impression is unrepeatable and personal. So with this, we'll end our video today in our comparison of two different styles that coexist in the 19th century, and I hope that you get a sense of the variety of some of the art that was produced in the 19th century that we have here at the Prado Museum. And we'll see you again next Wednesday for more conversations in English.